Bonjour. Is it loud enough? Yeah. Bonjour. Hello. Thank you all for being here today with me. So I'm Bérengère Digard. It's French. And I come from Lyon, but I study at the University of Edinburgh at the Patrick Wild Centre. My research is on bilingualism in autism. And today I'm going to tell you about 8 things to know about bilingualism in autism. So, first, a little disclaimer. As you will notice, there are several ways of referring to people with autism. Some people prefer person with autism or child with autism. Others prefer autistic person or autistic child. I do tend to use both interchangeably, just as it is done in the literature. So, first, let's try and just explain simply what is autism. So, it is a complex developmental condition. It is developmental, so it means that it begins in utero and it impacts the development of the brain. So, it is diagnosed usually during childhood, but it can also be diagnosed much later on in life, in adolescence or adulthood. So, it impacts the way the brain develops and works, and especially in 3 domains that are social communication, social relations, and imagination. Autism can occur with various degrees of intensity, and the autism experience is really influenced by the context and the environment. Also, autism can occur at all levels of ability, and it is a lifelong condition. So often when we picture autism, we think about a white boy under 10, but all these people are people with autism, and as you can see, there is a huge diversity in the autism population. So it has to be taken into account now. So for a very long time, autism was represented kind of like a spectrum, so like this. But now we start to better understand and to better acknowledge that diversity in autism. So we talk more about a constellation. And so on this slide, we could then picture it a little bit more like this. Now, let's move on to bilingualism. I'm sure all of you are kind of familiar with the concept of bilingualism, but I'll just give you a wee explanation on that. So in my talk, I will sometimes use the word bilingualism to refer to people with 2 languages, but also to people with many more languages. Like we could also use the word multilingualism, but I will mostly use the word bilingualism. So bilingualism is not at all rare, as you saw in the previous talk. It is considered that at least half the world's population is bilingual or lives in a bilingual environment. As all the skills we master, bilingualism shapes our brain and the way our brain works. For example, it has some impacts on something called executive functions. So I will not talk about that here. To know more about that, you should attend my friend's lecture tomorrow, Shirin Sharan, who will talk about bilingualism in autism on executive function specifically. The effect of bilingualism is also seen in something called social cognition. Basically, it's all the processes we use when we interact with other people, like understanding facial emotions or putting yourself in someone else's shoes. That's what I do, social cognition. But again here, I will not go into too many details about that. So all these effects of bilingualism can be shaped by all the different factors that influence bilingualism, like the age of acquisition, but also really important, the quantity and especially the quality of the bilingual exposure, and also something that can be really important depending on what you're interested in is the amount of switching that you do between your languages. So, for example, if both your languages are really separated in your life, it won't have the same impact on your brain than when you have constantly both languages interacting in the environment. So now when you put, as you can see, bilingualism is kind of like a spectrum as well. So when you cross these two spectrums, it gives something more like this. And then when you have to research that, it's kind of scary and complicated. So just for me, I prefer to see it that way, and then it is much more engaging and much less threatening. So now let's have a closer look at bilingualism in autism. So if it is so complicated, why would we even study that? Why does it matter? Well, because growing up with bilingualism and autism is not such an unusual story. Well, because of the way our society works today, so globalized and so international, there is an increase of the bilingual population. And at the same time, because we are getting better at understanding autism, there is an increase of the diagnosis rate of autism. As a result, there's more and more people living, more people with autism living in a bilingual environment, and we have to better understand this population. And especially, it is particularly relevant for bilingual families or families living in a bilingual environment with an autistic child. And, well, there are two problems. That on one side, on one hand, there is this sort of general belief that even for typically developing non-autistic children, bilingualism is still something that can be slightly complicated. So bilingualism for an autistic child who can already struggle to communicate, it would just be too much. It would just be sort of a useless cognitive overload for this child. So why would you ever put a second language to this child? And, well, the other situation is that there's barely any research done on bilingualism in autism. So as a result, the parents and practitioners are left with barely any guidance as to whether they should keep or not bilingualism. And you have to bear in mind that it is something really important, because it's about the language that they will use to interact with their child, and it's very important for the development of the child. So we have to better understand what's happening when we keep bilingualism, what's happening to the autistic brain. There are now very few published studies on the topic, and the first pieces of evidence actually are quite positive, because we show no delay in the general development and in the language development of autistic children brought up bilingually compared to autistic children brought up monolingually. So this is very encouraging. Well, to stay a little bit more with these bilingual parents of autistic children, in my university, my supervisors, Sue Fletcher-Watson and Antonella Solace, conducted a study to know what were the important factors leading parents to keep or not bilingualism with their child. So they asked these questions to parents of non-autistic children and of autistic children to know if they had, if the same things were important for them when making this decision. And what they found is that there were some really autism-specific reasons to discard bilingualism. And all of these were due to all the constraints imposed by autism. So, for example, that parents said all his interventions were in English, so it made sense for us to reference that. And again, we also found some topics that were really about potential harmful interactions between bilingualism and some autism-specific difficulties. Like some parents said, I'm scared of putting in too much confusion and he doesn't understand anything at all. Or another parent said, there are so many challenges that you're going through, and I don't know how many parents go through adding an additional language. And there was also just the general burden of bilingualism for family functioning when you have an autistic child. For example, some parents of a non-verbal autistic girl said, I don't care, I just wish she would speak, And actually what is really interesting is that these parents, because their child was non-verbal, they chose to drop bilingualism. But there was also another parent of a non-verbal autistic boy This one said, well, he doesn't speak anyway, so we just continue whatever we were doing and we'll see what happens. So there are two ways of approaching that problem. So today, that's barely what we have. Some data on the development of children and mainly the concerns of the parents. What I was interested in is what do they think the actual autistic people who speak more than one language, what do they think about that? So I asked them. And here comes the ABC, the study that I conducted. It is the Autism and Bilingualism Census. It was an online survey circulated for 3 months via social media and autism communities. This is the recruitment flyer, and I wanted to know how autism meets bilingualism. And we got so many responses. In total, with the monolingual group, because we needed also a monolingual group for a part of the study, in total we got 299 respondents, which is unbelievable. 80% of them had a clinical diagnosis of autism, 20% of them were self-identified, 58% of them were female, 23% of them were male. And I can't thank enough all the people who responded to this survey. It really helped us and we learned some great things, and we'll see right now. So just to tell you, this is the age range of the respondents. So the study was open to people who were 16 and older. And so most of the respondents were between 16 and 40, which is a really good representation. But some respondents were actually over 70. So in total, we got 89 monolinguals, English speakers, 99 bilinguals, 56 trilinguals, 55 people speaking 4 languages or more. In the survey, I went up to 7 languages of ranking of their abilities, but some reported knowing up to 10 languages. So there are many autistic bilinguals. So yes, these are the amount of languages. So now, these things that I want you to know about bilingualism and autism. Let's start. So the first thing is that autism comes in many languages. These are all the languages reported by the respondents in my study. So this is just 200 at least bilinguals, but multilinguals are autistic respondents. There are many, many languages, and it is actually the first study that shows that there are all these languages. It seems obvious, but actually no one asked that question until now. So it is something that should be acknowledged now in research and in autism practice. The second thing is that bilingualism is a lifelong adventure. This shows the age of acquisition of their languages. So for the second language, as you can see right here, many respondents actually said that they were introduced to their second language age 0. So they grew up with both their languages. And even if you go just a little bit higher in age, 3/4 of the respondents reported learning their languages before age 10 or 12. So most of them were introduced to their second language in childhood. And it's the same actually if we look at the third language. Most of them learned their third language before they were 20, which means that they are capable of learning these languages even under 20. And some people actually learn their other languages after 40, and it's completely fine. Now, the third thing is about how they rated their own proficiency in these languages. So I asked them for each of their languages to rate their proficiency in 4 modalities, so the speaking, understand, spoken, read and write, from not at all to excellent. Well, obviously, in the first language, most of them rated their proficiency at excellent, but if you look here at the second language, actually, we see that 3/4 of them rank their proficiency as at least quite adequate, quite good, clearly enough to sustain a conversation with someone or to understand a book or something. And it's the same for the third language. So actually, what we can see in this graph is that when they learn a second language or a third language, most of them can achieve quite a decent proficiency. And that is very interesting, especially when you put that in with the next to the consent of the parents, that maybe if you put too many languages, they won't even be able to speak one. But this graph shows completely a different result. Now, I was also really interested in learning where did they learn their languages. Well, obviously, the first thing that came a lot in their answers was that they learned their languages at home and with their family. So, for example, these respondents said that he would speak English with his mother and Dutch with his father. Another very prominent learning environment was obviously school. A respondent said that in his country, French and English were the languages that were taught and that he just had to learn them there. A third person said, well, a third group of responses was that they had learned their languages in the community. So, for example, this person who said that at age 5, they moved from Turkey to an Irish-speaking part of Ireland. So from then on, he would use Turkish at home and then Irish and English in the community. So that's where they learned the languages. And finally, many reported learning their languages independently using books and online resources. Now, so all that is really nice, but I was also interested in knowing what made that learning process easy for them. So what was often reported was actually the environment. And a participant said that immersion from birth seemed to have been the key to his ability to learn his second language, that after that he had never been able to learn any other languages. And other really important thing that helped them learning the languages was often actually their memory abilities. So, for example, this respondent said, my memory and hyperfocus could influence the way I learn. And another thing that is really interesting, given what Daniel said in the previous talk, was that what helped them really to learn their languages was were the rules and patterns in and between languages. So, for example, these two respondents who said, I can identify patterns very easily. And another one who said, languages are like jigsaw that I piece together. And I find that really lovely and interesting. So, now, well, there are some things that make it easier, but there are also some things that make it more complicated. And I was interested in knowing that as well. What came up is that often what made it more complicated was actually, again, the environment, and especially the school-based environment was often reported as traumatizing. So, for example, I found language classes stressful in school due to group work. Another thing that was a problem was all the oral component of the languages, so speaking and listening to spoken language. For example, I need time to process conversations, even in my native language. And that's something that came up a lot, that either the problem was just to process the conversation, that everything was just often going too fast, and so it's hard to understand the spoken language. But also, another problem that was often encountered was that it was difficult for them to distinguish words in the sounds and in the noise. And people with autism often report problems with auditory processing, and that is something that clearly makes the language learning more complicated. And another thing that came up a lot in the answers was the pressure, internal or external pressure, and especially the anxiety that comes along with getting it wrong discourages me. And that's something that was reported a lot, that they were just afraid of making mistakes, and because of that, they would just not produce. So then I was really happy to see that they could learn these languages, but I was also interested in knowing, well, they learn their languages, but maybe they learned also something else. And that was really exciting. So, for example, many reported that it improved their confidence. So, for example, people respect you more, and this gives you confidence apart from others' view, internally you feel more capable. And I didn't put it here, but another respondent said, I like reading books in a different language. It gives me confidence that I am not stupid, because even with a PhD, normal life can feel hard. Knowing another language helps me feel better about my brain, and I can relate to that so much. Another thing was that it helped them with the fact of being different. For example, one said, when I travel, I'm not the odd person anymore. Foreign languages bring freedom and adventure. And that is really deep and really thoughtful. And then also, it helped them with the ability to express what they feel. So, for example, each language I know allows me to better express specific thoughts and emotions. And that is really interesting because people with autism often report that they struggle with expressing exactly what they think and what they feel and transfer that to someone else when they speak to someone. And it was really, really interesting that knowing that, actually, many respondents would say that knowing all these languages will help them, knowing that, well, maybe for what I feel now, there's no word in my native language, but I know that there's a word for that in my second or third language. So I know it exists, and it is a knowledge, and I can communicate that feeling with other people, and it really, really helped them. Another thing was that it helped them actually, it was kind of it lowered the pressure. So for example, it is a pressure reducer. There's less imperative to get it right all the time. And again, that's something that came up a lot, that they felt that when they were speaking their second or third language, if they made mistakes, it was fine, because the person they were talking to wouldn't think that they are making mistakes because they're weird, because they have autism. No, they made mistakes because it's their second language. You can make mistakes, and that's fine. Another thing is that it helped them with their ability to interact with others. So, for example, it has improved my confidence that I can communicate with others. And again, that's really interesting, because a problem that is often reported by people with autism is that they really struggle to interact with other people. And it was really interesting to see that actually they reported that bilingualism helped them with that problem. And another thing was social rules. You have to know that people with autism often really struggle to understand social rules, especially because when you grow up, you are supposed to implicitly learn all these social rules of your own society and culture. But they really struggle to understand them implicitly. The thing is, when you learn a language, often you are also introduced to all the specific social rules of this new culture and society. And so, for example, this participant said, I still find myself using social cues from my non-native language because these were the ones that I actually learned. And it really helped them to actually be taught about all these social rules explicitly. And finally, two more things that were reported a lot, and that's the things that were the most reported, is that it helped them with understanding others, and it helped them to understand more ways of thinking. So, for example, here, it is useful to understand others and to perceive reality through different perspectives, or again, its language sets up a new way of thinking, and there is more than one way of thinking, speaking, and experiencing things. And it is, again, really, really interesting because in research, what is often researched in social cognition, the thing I was telling you about earlier, is that people with autism can really struggle to have that change of perspective, to adopt someone else's views, and actually, they reported themselves spontaneously that learning languages had really, really helped them with that, just understanding that, because in one language you can sometimes approach the same problem differently, and learning that really helped them in their general abilities to understand other ways of thinking. Now, the last thing that you should know about bilingualism in autism is that language brings opportunities. So, for example, basically the opportunity of knowledge. So, learning languages opens up worlds, literature, and even internet. So, but that is quite obvious, but still, they reported it, and for many of them, it was something that was really, really important. Another thing, some employment and education opportunities. So, for example, many reported that they couldn't do their job without their multiple languages. And something really, really interesting was the feeling of community. You have to know that people with autism often report this feeling of isolation and not being able to reach out to people that could understand them. And actually, one of the things that was the most reported again was that thanks to their multiple languages, they were able to speak and interact with people like them with autism all around the globe. And it made them feel more being part of a real community. So, for example, this person said, "It is great to be able to communicate online with people about ourselves and our autism. It makes you feel less alone." So now, time for a recap. So as you saw, there were some very autism-specific concerns and difficulties. So, for example, I need time to process conversations even in my native language. And there were also some autism-specific benefits and opportunities, like it has improved my confidence that I can communicate with others. But I'm sure that you actually noticed that there were many things that were just common to everybody, some concerns and difficulties that everybody who learns languages can feel and experience, like the anxiety that comes along with getting it wrong discourages me, or some benefits and opportunities that are brought up to anyone who learns languages, like there is more than one way of thinking, speaking, and experiencing things. Everybody who learns a second or third language learns that as well. So, as one of the participants said, it is useful for people on the autism spectrum to learn several languages, as it is useful for absolutely everyone else. So, now, what's next? Well, for research, what's next is kind of absolutely everything. So we would need more longitudinal studies to really follow the development of children who are brought up with several languages. Also would need just much larger samples in our studies to better capture the individual differences. Also, there are many questions that we would need to address, like something that Daniel talked about in the previous talk. Some things can be beneficial for some people, but not others. So we can't say that, yes, it seems really positive for people with autism to learn several languages, so all the parents should just put more languages on their autistic child. Maybe not. Maybe for some of them, actually, it would be problematic, but we would need to understand that. So we have to know who can really get some benefits from learning languages, and who, for whom would it be just complicated at that point in time. Also, as you saw, many reported that the learning environment and the learning methods were actually really important in their ability to learn the language. So maybe we would need to better understand what would be the best learning methods for them. And also, we need to understand the impacts of bilingualism upon their skills. So are there some specific skills that are influenced by bilingualism? And that brings to what's next for me. Well, what I showed you here is just a part of the first step in my research. that looks at social habits. So my entire research is to look at the effects of bilingualism on social cognition, so the processes we use when we interact with other people, every step of the way. So the step one was social habits. But then comes step two, that is really the perspective-taking abilities, so when you take the perspective of someone else. And finally, what's happening inside the brain. So that's what's next for me for the next 2 years. And finally, what's next for you? Well, I don't have many answers, and you are probably even more puzzled now that you were at the beginning of the talk. But you know what? Like in all the things that I just told you, don't take my word for it. And just these are books. You may have seen this guy. These are books written by people with autism and who know many, many, many languages. And you should just read their books. So I put them here in French because I read them in French. But grab them in your own language and you will probably learn much more than what you learned here. That's it for me. I thank you for being here and for listening to me. I also really thank, obviously, my team and my supervisors. You can follow my work on Twitter at Bérengère Digard, or on my supervisor's Twitter, Reviews, or on our website here. And as participant 10 said at the end of the survey, I hope you have a great day.
I suppose the 299 people who answered your questionnaire were better functioning autists, maybe Asperger's or something, because you have nobody without a language, and these people at least have to be able to respond to a questionnaire. Have you any idea how far down the skill level your conclusions will reach?
Well, the thing is, when doing autism research, you can never generalize your findings. It just works for one group of the population. But what is really interesting is that actually I've had an email from the mother of a non-verbal autistic child, and she brought him up bilingually. And so she reported that actually he likes to watch his movies in one language, to do other things in the other language, just like any bilingual child does, really. So he couldn't speak, but he could understand both, and he, like any child with bilingualism, he would just prefer to use some languages for some things and the other language for something else. So we need more research in this population, of course.
Hi, I think gentleman had partially covered my question. I think it's right, right on the head of the nail. With 299 as a sample, you also think that you need a bigger sample. And I was also wondering about the bias that you could cause with one language, two languages, three languages. The comments and the feedback that you're getting from the parents, do you see a certain pattern where the higher functioning, I guess a higher number of languages, the parents would give more positive feedback and more, I guess, hopeful comments? And maybe I was quite surprised to see that there's approximately equal number of respondents from monolingual and bilingual. I was thinking there would be much more from the monolinguals. So maybe there's a group who doesn't tend to answer these questions that you're not capturing.
Well, probably. I mean, it is an online survey.
Yeah.
I get what I get. So the monolingual group, I guess we could have got more people for the monolingual group, but actually we just wanted enough for the statistical analysis that I didn't present here. But regarding your concern for the parents, so it was not my research, so I don't know it particularly well, but of course their ability, their choice in keeping or not bilingualism was very much influenced by the ability of the child, but also it was influenced by the interests of the child. So for example, there was this child who just would shut out every time their parents would start using the other language. So they just dropped it. On the other hand, there was this child who loved to listen to people speaking really fast in different languages. He really enjoyed that. So they could reinforce bilingualism. As I said in one of the last slides, it really depends on the actual person. And that's why we would need studies to understand these differences and to better understand, okay, for this child, we can try. For this child, maybe it's not the right time now.
I know your talk doesn't really say much, you didn't say much about like recommending specific methods or generalizing for policies, but I was wondering if you could comment on whether one big issue is just trying to figure out what the best way is to teach a child. And I ask this because I grew up with English and Chinese, and I have a brother who's autistic. And one big problem we have is just figuring out, not just figuring out a method, but also maybe at times we underestimate what he's really capable of.
Yes, well, this is not at all my field of expertise, I'm sorry, but it's true. It's a really important field of research, actually, development in autism, to really know what you can ask a child to do and how do you teach a child. But again, that's really one by one, and something that works for one may not work for the next one. I'm sorry, I can't give you a more definite answer.
Have you seen or do you foresee like looking into when a second or third language is acquired, like how that influences like the development or benefits, or because like learning a second language from birth versus learning it later, I don't know the details, but I know like it affects your brain differently. Is that something you've looked at or plan on looking at?
That's something that I'm going to look at in 6 months and a year. That's my PhD thesis, so that's something I will look at. So come back to me in a couple of years and I will answer your question.
Hi, merci Bérengère for the talk. And,
De rien.
My question was, you talked a lot about the kids, the type of autism they had. It was a function of the type of autism, the interest in the child. But what I wanted to ask is, from the survey, did you get any feedback from certain methods or certain things parents did differently on the more successful cases versus maybe some that were more like the average, or maybe patterns you saw across the parents that got really positive feedback?
Well,
the way they behave with the child and so forth.
Well, in this survey, I didn't have any parents. It was just really the adult autistic bilingual people. So something that came up as being really good for them was actually to learn their language, their second language, at home from birth or from really early on, like 5. So for them, like for the one who said that he had learned the second language at home successfully, but all the other languages that were introduced, nothing. So for this one, learning the languages at home from really early on was the thing that made it successful. But again, it depends because of the really specific memory abilities and the ability also to see patterns. Some people actually were introduced to their languages really late. Really late. We're talking adolescence or even university. Still, it was just their intrinsic ability to see these patterns that made them entirely able to learn their languages. So then it was not what the parents had done, it was just their own ability, and that they just happened to stumble upon learning languages, realize that they were really good at it, and then go deeper into that.
Hi. This is really just a comment on what you've just said. I had a very interesting talk yesterday with a lady here on precisely these questions, and she told me that she's got a 7-year-old son who is autistic, and he was nonverbal, but all the time he was being exposed to at least 3 languages, and one day he just suddenly burst out like a river, and they can't stop him now. So it all happens well eventually?
Well, actually, one of the participants reported that because he was uncomfortable producing until he was really certain that what he was going to say was perfect, he would not speak at all, really. And so people were actually really surprised because in all the languages that he learned, he wouldn't say a word, and then suddenly he would start speaking almost fluently. It's just that he was unable to produce anything if he wasn't sure that it would be perfect. And so it happens also. Again, it really depends on the profiles when you talk about autism. But in the books that I recommended you, there's also 2 books by Joseph Chovanec, who is a French author. And actually, he was nonverbal as well for a very long time in his childhood. And now he speaks, I don't know, maybe 10 languages. So the fact that the child is nonverbal, well, even in research, we don't really know why this child is going to be nonverbal. So why not continue, why not try? These are concerns of the parents. And to date, we don't know. We can't tell one family, yes, you should keep the language, or no, you shouldn't, because your child is nonverbal.
I gather from your answers to other questions and the whole thrust of your research that this is sort of peripheral to what you're doing, but I'm just curious in the whole spectrum of research into autism and languages. You mentioned that you're mainly studying people who were autistic from in utero, but my understanding is that autism is really on the rise because of environmental things, particularly vaccines, and I happen to know a couple of families where they had children that seemed perfectly normal and then got some vaccines and became autistic. And I was wondering if that's a field of research there for what happens to languages under circumstances like that.
So vaccine does not cause autism. We don't really know what causes autism. What the lead at the moment is that there are some genetic potentials that can be unlocked by the environment, but autism starts in utero. The development of the brain is different from the beginning, but then the problem is that the things that we use to diagnose autism are things that won't be in the behavior until 4 or 5 years old in the development. That's why it kind of clashes with vaccines, but actually it is not linked. So yes, for these children, because many children were actually reported to develop really normally until one day they started to show the signs of autism. In that case, for the language, I'm not at all a specialist in this area, but I read some papers saying that the child had started to lose language. For some, it came back afterwards. So then you just treat that as, well, all the cases that I talked about, the parents who have a non-verbal child or a child that barely produces. From the bilingualism point of view, you just take that the same way.
Thank you very much, Bérengère. Give her a round of applause.